Hi everyone, thanks for coming back for part 2. I want to talk a little bit more about the wall. And I had made a video some time ago about a table, or actually I made 2 or 3 videos about a table that I had done on the 7 thunders and how it came up in Nehemiah 7 verse 72, which this is an anagram of 727, which is the Strong's number for the Rapture in the Ark of the Covenant. But it's also half of 144, half of 144 would be 72. And it talks about the 144,000 in the book of Revelation in chapters that are multiples of 7. And I had pointed out how it talks about the wall being built in Nehemiah 7:1, which looks like the number 17 backwards. But when you look at the word wall, in the Hebrew, you see that it's Strong's number 2346, and I had pointed out how there's 23 chromosomes, or 22 sets of 23 chromosomes in the human body for a total of 46. But it's in Nehemiah 6 where it says that the wall was finished in the 25th day of the month of Elul, and it took 52 days. And so I had pointed out before that this would be like a mirror reflection, because it was the 25th day of Elul and it was in 52 days, so that's like the number 25 backwards. And the month of Elul is like a mirror reflection. Anyway, I had shown in another video how the Jews make a heart with the 2 lamids in the word Elul, and how it's believed to be the month that represents being face to face with God. It supposedly starts out as being back to back, but then by the end of Elul it's supposed to be face to face, and so they make the Jewish heart with the 2 lamids facing each other, and it looks like a heart. And so the entire month of Elul is symmetrical, which is something I want to talk about a little bit more about, the symmetry of the Bible. But Elul is also the 12th month of the year, and I had pointed out before that the 62 weeks actually comes up to year 0 in Daniel's prophecy, which would be the date that's believed to be the year of Christ's birth, and it's believed to be the 12th month and the 25th day. Of course, on the Hebrew calendar, that would be Elul. Okay, so when you go to Daniel's prophecy, it says, "Now therefore understand that from the beginning of the command to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks." Okay, so if you take the 62 weeks, then it goes on to say the street shall be built again and the wall even in troublous times. So 62 weeks would be 62 weeks. Okay, so 62 times 7 is 434 years. Okay, so 434 years from 434 BC, of course, would be year 1. It's actually year 0, but you have to add the 1 because there's no year 0 on the timeline when they converted it from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. They didn't add the year 0 as being on the timeline, so you have to add 1 when you go from BC to AD. So 434 years would take you to year 1 or year 0, which would be the time that's believed to be Christ's birth. So the 62 weeks takes you to the first coming of the Messiah as a baby. But since the actual year of Christ's birth, or the year of creation, would have been 5,984 to 983 BC, it would actually take you to the year when Jesus was 17 years old. But since Jesus lived to be 33 and a half years old, so he was halfway into his 34th year when he died, what I realized is that the year 0, which is when the calendar changes from BC to AD, or year 1, this is actually the year that cuts Jesus's life in half. So you have 17 on one side and 17 on the other side. Okay, so like I said earlier, everything has to be divided in the midst, just like it says in this prophecy. Okay, and that brings me to this table over here. I actually couldn't remember which table it was where this came up in, but this table comes up in Genesis 15. Okay, this is when God made a covenant with Abraham, and he told Abraham to take a heifer of 3 years old, a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he took unto him all these, and divided them in the midst, and laid each piece one against another. But the birds divided he not, and when the fowls came down upon the carcasses, Abram drove them away. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, a horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace, thou shalt be buried in a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. And it came to pass that when the sun went down, and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces. Okay, so this is the confirming of the covenant in verse 17. And as you can see, the sacrifice had to be divided in half. Okay, so getting back to the wall of Nehemiah, as you can see, God confirms the year with the word Elul, because it's Strong's number 435 and 434 is the Strong's number for the word Elul. Okay, when you get to Nehemiah 12, it talks about the dedication of the wall. I hadn't even thought about the word dedication, but this is when the wall was dedicated, and also didn't realize this was going to be in verse 27. Okay, so you can see that over here where it talks about the dedication of the wall in Nehemiah 12, verse 27. And then when you go to the next chapter in Nehemiah 13, you see in verse 6 that it was the 32nd year of Artaxerxes. Okay, so it was the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, and as you can see, it was a Hebrew year 3327. So you have the number 32 within the year. So that's another way that it appears God is confirming the year that the wall was built or dedicated, which is what it's talking about in this prophecy in Daniel 9:24 through 27, where it says, Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. So this is the fulfillment of the building of the wall. And this would have been when Jesus was 17 years old, which would be cutting the life of the Messiah in half, and the coming of the Messiah would have been in 27 AD, and the confirming of the covenant was cut in half 3.5 years later when the Messiah was cut off. And the word cut off is actually the word karath, which means to cut, as in to cut a covenant, because to make a covenant you always had to have an animal sacrifice, and so when they made a covenant they called it cutting a covenant. So usually when you see the word karath in the Hebrew, it's usually talking about making a covenant. And this is the same word that was used for the cutting off of the Messiah. Okay, so the point that I'm trying to make is that the entire Bible is a representation of DNA, and it just so happens to be that Psalm 117 is the middle chapter of the entire Bible. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about is God's name, and as I mentioned in my last video, this is the Aleph Tav, which, as Leland Jones had explained in his video as well, would be the name of God. It's one of the names of God because Jesus said, "I'm the Alpha and the Omega." And as you can see, this was used 22 times in the Old Testament, and it comes from another word, which is Strong's 22:6, which means the same thing. It means a sign or a signal or an ensign. And as I had suggested in my last video, I believe that the 6 represents man. And so I theorized that this might be the sign of the Son of Man, might be a DNA strand, because 22 is a number that represents DNA. But what I wanted to point out is how God's name is even in 2 parts, with the Yod-He, Yav-He, and it means I am that I am. So it's a 2-part name. And then one of the other names for God is the word Abba, which means Father, which again is symmetrical, and it comes in 2 parts. And it's interesting that it's in Galatians 4:6, which is another number that has to do with DNA, because there's 46 chromosomes in the human body. But it says over here, "And because we are sons, God sent forth the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father." And so, like I said, that's in Galatians 4:6, which looks like the number 46. And this is how it appears in the Hebrew. So again, you can see the symmetry of the word Abba. But I actually noticed something else very interesting, because it kind of bothered me that God's name is not exactly symmetrical, although it's almost symmetrical. But I noticed something else when I was looking at God's name in the Hebrew. You can see it Strong's number 3068. And it means the existing one is what Jehovah or Yahweh means. But I notice that it comes from this word over here, which is another form of the same word. It means to become, to exist. So this would also mean the existing one, because it means to exist. And this one is, however, symmetrical. As you can see over here, this one's exactly symmetrical. And not only that, but the Strong's number is symmetrical. It's like the right side up, upside down, because you see the number 19 over here, and then you have 61, which looks like 19 backwards, or you have the 9, 6, which are right side up, upside down, and then the 1, which would represent God. And it was in Isaiah 9:6 where it prophesied about Jesus coming as a baby at his first coming. And it was also in Luke 2:11, which is another number that would represent DNA. But I still haven't gotten to the really amazing thing that I discovered while watching this video. But since I'm running out of time, I'll have to explain it in the next video. But as I was looking for the next thing that I wanted to talk about, I just happened to come across this part in the video, which is another example of symmetry or a palindrome with the name Eve, which represents the bride. And this was just a joke over here, the top part about Adam, but as you can see, God's name is also symmetrical, so both God and the bride are symmetrical. But what I wanted to talk about was this verse right here in Genesis 3:24. And what got my attention about this verse was this word right here in the Hebrew, which I couldn't help notice how it looked like the number 777. And so I was intrigued by this word, and I wanted to see what it looked like in the Greek and in the Hebrew. And when I looked at the original text, that's when I noticed something interesting about this verse, because I had never fully understood it before, and I think I have a better understanding of this verse now, but I'll have to explain it in the next video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.